Trains magazine. For more than 55 years, it has set the standard for excellence in railroad writing and photography. Now Trains brings you a series of video documentaries produced to the same high standards you've come to expect from Trains magazine. Trains on Location. Cajon Pass, Santa Fe's heroic crossing of the mountains that ring Los Angeles. You'll ride a fast freight east from San Bernardino to Victorville, and you'll hit the highlights along the way, including Sullivan's Curve, Steins Hill, the top of the pass at Summit, and the flyover at Frost, plus plenty of action on Southern Pacific's parallel line. Conrail's Horseshoe Curve. Capture the spirit of the famed Pennsylvania Railroad between the shop town of Altoona and historic Johnstown, Pennsylvania. Along the way, you'll visit Conrail's awesome Juniata locomotive shops. Visit interlocking towers where operators practice a vanishing craft, and thrill to the sound and fury of famous Horseshoe Curve. Burlington Northern's Chicago Racetrack. Trains once declared this to be the greatest piece of railroad in the world, and based on the evidence of this show, there's little reason to disagree. Appalachian Conquest. Is the Corbin Main Line of CSX one of the best-kept train-watching secrets in America? It depends how you feel about coal and merchandise trains grinding up mountain grades and blasting through tunnels. Southern Pacific's Cascade Crossing. 44 miles of twisting track, brutal grades, and awesome scenery in the Cascade Mountains of western Oregon. It's SP at its fighting best, at the golden height of summer and the frigid depths of winter. Conrail's Chicago Gateway. It's more than just Conrail's freights on the Chicago line between East Chicago and South Bend, Indiana. It's also the trains of Amtrak, CP Rail, the Chicago, South Shore, and South Bend, and Kammerdschei Steel Mill Railroads. Amtrak's Northeast Corridor. Explore Amtrak's high-speed multi-track main line between New York and Washington, D.C. Intercity trains and commuter trains, switching operations at Washington Union Station, and freight action on nearby CSX. Tehachapi, the most celebrated train-watching spot in the American West. SP's crossing of the Tehachapi Mountains between Mojave and Bakersfield is the stage for non-stop railroad action, including the colorful trains of Burlington Northern Santa Fe. On the heart of the Wisconsin Central, you'll visit America's premier regional railroad between Waukesha and Neenah, Wisconsin. Get ready for a parade of die-hard diesels from EMD and pulse-pounding action on the railroad's steepest grade, Byron Hill. San Francisco, rails around the Bay Area. Treat yourself to the action and variety of freight, passenger, and tourist railroading around the beautiful San Francisco Bay Area. And that includes a rainbow of diesel locomotive models from unique to antique. Ask for Trains on Location at your favorite hobby store, or you may order direct by calling our 24-hour toll-free line at 1-800-533-6644. That's 1-800-533-6644. And look for more in the Trains on Location documentary series.
Hi, I'm Kevin Keith, editor of Trains Magazine, and welcome to On Location, our series of video documentaries about great train watching spots around North America. In this program, we'll take you to Stevens Pass, the legendary crossing of the Cascade Mountains in Washington, built more than a century ago by Great Northern Railway and operated today by Burlington Northern and Santa Fe. Our crew first went to Stevens Pass in the summer of 1994 to shoot the trains of Burlington Northern, and returned 2.5 years later in the winter to shoot the trains of BNSF. And watch for more in our On Location series, direct from the pages of Trains Magazine. And now, Stevens Pass. Burlington Northern and Santa Fe's Stevens Pass may be the Rodney Dangerfield of Western mountain crossings. It can't get any respect. Train watchers flock to Donner Pass in Northern California to witness Union Pacific's struggle across the Sierra Nevada. Tehachapi Loop in Southern California is a railfan shrine, a temple where the faithful pay homage to UP and BNSF's battle with the Tehachapi Mountains. Nor have bad weather and limited access diminished the lure of another crossing in the Pacific Northwest, UP's crossing of the Cascade Mountains in western Oregon. Many fans have a sour reaction to Stevens Pass. They complain that there's too much rain, not surprising given that precipitation in the pass averages 120 inches a year. Photographers grumble that too many trees block the view or leave much of the line in shadow, which makes it difficult to get brightly lit images. And while it may be nice to stop at a drive-in on Highway 2 for a snack between trains, chasing trains on this always busy road can be a pain. But as Ringo Starr once sang, you know it don't come easy. And when it comes to Stevens Pass, what you give is what you get. One of the reasons Stevens Pass may not get as much attention as other western mountain passes is because of its location in Washington State and the Pacific Northwest. Our story begins at the eastbound grade at Gold Bar. From there, the line climbs a 1.1% grade through Index to milepost 1739.5 at Bering. The tracks level off for the next 7 miles until they reach the old railroad crew change point of Skykomish. Then the grade stiffens to 2.2 for the climb to Scenic, the last timetable station before the line crests the Cascades inside 7-mile-long Cascade Tunnel. After the tracks pop into daylight at the east portal, they continue through Bern to Winton, the start of a 1929 line relocation called the Chumstick Line. The original route returns near Leavenworth and continues down a 1.6% grade to Peshastin. There the grade dips to 1% for the next 19 miles to the end of the crew district at Wenatchee, Washington. It's easy to take Stevens Pass at face value. Case in point, hot intermodal train number 3 headed west through Index in the late afternoon on June 18, 1994. On the other hand, a knowing eye can find clues to the line's history. The red caboose displayed next to Zeke's Drive-In on nearby Highway 2 bears the distinctive logo of the Great Northern Railway, which completed the Stevens Pass route to Seattle in 1893. After helping to establish Glacier National Park in Montana in 1910, GN incorporated the Rocky Mountain Goat as part of its corporate identity. Even in 1994, 24 years after GN merged into the Burlington Northern Railroad, the goat survives in commercial signs along US 2. The daily Amtrak train that crosses Stevens Pass on its journey between Seattle and Chicago offers another clue. The name Empire Builder honors GN President James J. Hill, the man who took the little St. Paul and Pacific in 1878 and expanded it from St. Paul to the fledgling Puget Sound seaport of Seattle, Washington. Hill's grandiose plan rested on his prediction that Asian goods moving from the West Coast would one day overshadow the trade between the Atlantic Ocean and Europe. Based on the intermodal traffic headed west on BN train number 13, he was right. Only one thing stood in the way of Hill's dream, the Cascade Mountains. Dreaming of freight trains rolling through the mountains and skating over waterfalls was one thing, but making that dream come true, well, that was another matter. Milepost 1732.3 marks the location of Skykomish, a former division point on GN's Cascade Division. Like St. Peter at the gates of heaven, Rocky greets you upon your arrival in Skykomish. But the Great Northern's mascot isn't the only clue to the town's status as a railroad town. Granted, you may miss the street sign modeled after a caboose, but you can find the real thing tucked away nearby in someone's backyard. Another clue to the town's past is the Skykomish Hotel. It's no surprise the hotel faces the tracks. It once served as a railroad hotel. It's not exactly the posh Four Seasons in Seattle, but then the Four Seasons doesn't offer views like this. One building in Skykomish isn't hard to miss, the old Great Northern Station. The telegraph office and agent are long gone, of course, but the building remained in good shape in 1994, a base for BN maintenance of way workers and equipment. Train 604 barely breaks a sweat as it rolls out of Skykomish. It's no surprise, given that its lead unit is a 3,000 horsepower SD40-2 built by Electromotive, known as EMD. The second unit is even more powerful, a 3,600 horsepower SD45 owned by MK Rail's subsidiary MPI. As if that isn't enough power, the two GP38-2s bringing up the rear add up to another 4,000 horses. But make no mistake about it, 604 requires every ounce of horsepower, every bit of its crew's expertise. Over the years, Stevens Pass has reaped the rewards of engineering advances that have significantly improved operations over the mountain. But for all of that, the toughest obstacle on Stevens Pass remains the 11 miles between Skykomish and a spot near the summit of the pass known as Scenic. Forget the line relocations that eliminated tight curves through places such as Index in the 1960s. Here the tracks follow what is, for the most part, the original 1890 alignment. Yes, the scenery's breathtaking, but the fight between the railroad and the mountain is down and dirty. It's no surprise how Scenic got its name. The mountains surrounding this interlocking go back 65 million years to a time when saber-toothed tigers and woolly mammoths ruled the world. Ice Age glaciers sculpted the mountains as they retreated north, leaving behind lush forests favored by abundant moisture and favorably westerly weather patterns. Change on the BN in 1994 was considerably less dramatic. The blue Conrail unit in the consist of this eastbound train reflects a run-through train by which Conrail delivered westbound trains directly to BN in Chicago, complete with locomotives. The blue EMD unit in this consist is another story. BN lacked sufficient locomotives to haul its trains in 1994, so the railroad leased power from EMD and other sources, including the MPI units we saw earlier. The color and ownership of the locomotives on the front end of the train were less important than the railroad's mission to move freight reliably and at the lowest cost to its customers. It's not uncommon to find eastbound trains parked in the siding at East Scenic. Occasionally, the dispatcher in Fort Worth, Texas will run a high-priority eastbound train, such as Amtrak number 8, around an eastbound in the siding. More often, an eastbound train will hold the siding for an opposing westbound move. Even after the westbound clears, though, an eastbound may hold the siding for as much as half an hour. That's because East Scenic is the staging area for Tunnel 15, best known as Cascade Tunnel. Cascade Tunnel lies between milepost 1708.5 at East Scenic and 1700.3, which marks the bore's east portal. This is actually the second Cascade Tunnel. When GN opened Stevens Pass in 1893, it employed a 12-mile network of switchbacks to reach the 4,068-foot summit of Stevens Pass. The switchbacks allowed trains to zigzag up and down the mountain, a temporary solution until construction of the first Cascade Tunnel in 1900. The new tunnel lowered the summit to 3,383 feet. Unfortunately, the steam locomotives on trains struggling uphill through the bore were prone to suffocating their crews. GN decided to electrify the tunnel between Wellington on the west and Cascade Station on the east, a distance of 4 miles. GN opted for an unusual 2-wire, 3-phase electrification dubbed the Italian system. The tunnel roof carried a wire on each side with the track serving as the third conductor. In 1927, the railroad switched to a more conventional approach, an 11,500-volt single-phase trolley system. It also purchased bigger GE locomotives, part of a plan to build a new tunnel at a lower elevation. And what a plan it turned out to be. Today's Cascade Tunnel is a 7.7-mile-long straight-line bore with a maximum elevation of 2,881 feet. When it opened in 1929, it eliminated 8 miles of snow sheds and more than 5 complete circles of curvature. Train capacity doubled at the same time transit times improved by 75%. As part of the package, GN extended electrification east to Wenatchee and west to Skykomish. A ventilation system allowed diesel locomotive operation through Cascade Tunnel in 1956, spelling the end of GN's electrification. But Cascade Tunnel survives, an important part of BN and successor BNSF's operations over Stevens Pass.
The operation of a train in the Cascade Tunnel, I'll start using an eastbound operation, is when the dispatcher has the controls in automatic, train hits a circuit at the west switch at Scenic. That sends a signal to the fan house at the east portal of the Cascade Tunnel to close the door and start one fan. That gives the train time enough to come up through the yard at Scenic. And as it comes around the curve, by that time the door is closed and the fan is at full speed, and there will be a set of flashing lights indicating to the train that the fans are going and with the high green or the signal, That means that he can proceed into the tunnel. The next thing that would happen in the tunnel is that train's working as a piston when he goes in there. And we're supplying air around that locomotive to force the air into those diesel air chambers so that those units can breathe. And at the same time, he's working as a piston, and he's creating a lot of pressure against the door at the east end and also against the fans. And to prevent the fans from stalling, we relieve the pressure, actually that's being built up against the door by some louvers that are located up above the door structure. And we can maintain a high pressure so the air is being actually forced around those diesel units and beyond the train. When the train hits what we call the door open circuit, which is 3,000 feet from the east portal, the door goes open and the train proceeds out of the tunnel. Once the train has cleared, the signals sent back tell us the train is clear. The door closes again and the second fan starts, and we go into what we call the flush mode and we clean the tunnel out. And that's a normal eastbound movement through the Cascade Tunnel. The flush mode takes 30 minutes under normal operations. It can be cut off by the Seattle dispatcher at any time that he desires, but normally they like to keep it running for 30 minutes so that the tunnel's good and clean and set up for the next train. The westbound operation in the tunnel is fairly new within the last 10, 11 years. With the westbounds, even though he's going downhill through the tunnel at 1.5 grade, he still leaves smoke in the tunnel. So what we do is we use the train and the fan together to help take the dirty smoke out of the tunnel, which gets it cleaned out, for instance, for the next Eastman that would be sitting at Scenic wanting to come into the tunnel. It was built in 1929, and they're still using it today, and they're pumping between 20 to 24 trains a day through there and still wanting to get more through. So I think it's more than paid for itself, improved itself.
The upper Nason Creek area on the east slope of the pass holds clues to another GN line improvement. The American Steel Bridge Company built this trestle in 1948, a year before Great Northern relocated the old main line from the edge of the canyon. Trains now have a straight shot through the canyon, which allows for faster running times. Fortunately, the 1949 line improvement hasn't hurt the train watching in the canyon. 45 years later, you could still see remnants of the old right-of-way. The wood poles that once carried GN's catenary litter the wall above Nason Creek like monster toothpicks. You'll see another clue at tunnel 14.5, where the abandoned right-of-way curves around the north side of the tunnel. Milepost 1686.9 marks the location of Winton. This is also the east end of a 6-mile stretch of level track, an uncommon occurrence on Stevens Pass. Winton hosts another rarity, an online customer. Longview Fiber Company handles inbound and outbound wood products by rail, although trucks provide BN with plenty of competition. You'll mainly see two types of freight cars at Longview Fiber's Winton plant. These wood chip cars are the largest of all hopper or gondola cars. It takes as much as 7,000 cubic feet of lightweight wood chips to approach the 100-ton weight limit. The center beam bulkhead flat cars in the consist of this train have largely replaced the 40-foot flat cars of old. These cars now carry the lion's share of finished and packaged lumber because it's easy to unload them with forklift trucks. The train, incidentally, is the Merritt Local, the only local train to operate regularly on the east side of Stevens Pass. A stop at East Winton yields an SD40-2 wearing BN's last paint scheme. Dubbed the white face by rail fans, the white cab face and logo increase the engine's visibility at grade crossings. A mechanical problem with one of the diesels gave us a chance for another look at the train. Tucked behind the whiteface SD40-2 was a B30-7A built by GE without a cab, an economy move favored by BN in the 1980s. The third unit was another run-through unit, this time a black SD40-2 from Norfolk Southern. And just in case things weren't interesting enough, the trailing unit was an EMD GP30 upgraded mechanically to what BN called a GP39. The line between Winton and Peshaston reflects another improvement to the Stevens Pass route in the 1920s, the Chumstick line. The GN had spiked its original main line in Tumwater Canyon, infamous for its slides, washouts, and falling rocks. Although the Chumstick is only a mile shorter than the old main, it has 48 fewer curves. The sharpest curves are 3 degrees versus 9 on the old route. What's more, the grade is just 1.6% compared to the old line's 2.2%. The old right-of-way survives as U.S. Highway 2. Driving along the banks of the Wenatchee River, you can imagine what it was like sitting on the right-hand side of a Great Northern steam engine, easing the original Empire builder down the 2.2%. Not that fantasizing about the old line is a substitute for the real thing on the Chumstick line. The Burlington Northern never served Leavenworth, Washington. Yes, the timetable lists Leavenworth as a station, and this siding at milepost 1672.2 goes by the name Leavenworth Siding. But the actual town of Leavenworth lost its rail service when the Chumstick Line opened in 1929. Up to then, Leavenworth had been a division point on the Tumwater Line, complete with a yard, roundhouse, and a machine shop. Then GN tore up the Tumwater Line, leaving Leavenworth isolated until the construction of the Cascade Highway in the 1930s. But Leavenworth refused to die. In the early 1960s, local citizens decided to make use of the town's greatest asset, its scenic location. A so-called Bavarianization plan transformed Leavenworth into a mock Bavarian village, right down to the signs on the local businesses. Today, there's not so much as a rail siding in Leavenworth, but that hasn't prevented this charming town from being a mecca for thousands of tourists. Between Leavenworth and Wenatchee, the BN follows the GN's original 1892 alignment. And why not? The grade is a mere 1%, practically a stroll through the park compared with the 2.2% grade between Skykomish and Scenic. The scenery's different too. For one thing, this is fruit country. The landscape is a carpet of orchards bearing apples and pears. But fruit trees aren't the only contrast with the west slope. The Douglas firs found at the higher elevations give way to ponderosa pines, mixed conifers, and grasslands. Precipitation is lower here because the Cascades form a natural barrier that prevents dense cloud formations from moving east. Even the sky looks different in a place like Kashmir. Here you can sense the mythical West, the one populated by cowboys and horses in old John Wayne films. Even the ancient Dodge, parked next to the tracks, feels like it belongs here. You expect the trains to move like roadrunners in a place like this, and they do. The Stevens Pass line ends at Wenatchee, where the river of the same name joins the Columbia River. The Great Northern's passenger timetables describe Wenatchee as the apple capital of the world. To prove the point, the railroad named their 10-track yard in the banks of the Columbia River Apple Yard when it opened in 1922. GN even added an icing platform and an ice unloading spur to improve the movement of apples by the railroad and the Pacific Fruit Express. You'll find a hint of apple yards past in a park in town. Great Northern 1147 was the last steam engine to operate out of Wenatchee in 1956. It's a 280, so named for the 2 pilot wheels in front, the 8 driving wheels under the boiler, and the lack of a trailing truck under the cab. The shops and roundhouse that once served GN's steam and electric locomotives are long gone. Instead, diesels gather at the locomotive tracks near the yard office a mile or so away from Apple Yard. This is what old-timers call WO, a throwback to the days when each station or tower on the railroad had telegraph call letters. The telegraph office followed the electrics and the icing platforms into history. But Wenatchee's still a division point, and you can still watch eastbound trains, such as this number 20, stop to change train crews. Then it's off to the next division point and crew change 175 miles away in Spokane. Two and a half years later, train crews still change at WO. What's different are the locomotives that power these trains. The orange and green units are GEs ordered by BNSF, the recent merger of Burlington Northern and Santa Fe. Unlike the Conrail or MPI units we saw a few years ago, these Santa Fe engines belong to the railroad. We'll see more of them as we retrace our steps over the pass. The difference in climate and precipitation that we noted on the east slope of the pass in the summer is even more obvious in the winter. The dry air feels like sandpaper when the wind is up and the outside temperature dips below freezing. In the Wenatchee Valley, winter's color palette favors browns, whites, and dark blues. What adds a splash of color are locomotives painted for Santa Fe, BN, and BNSF. And yes, the trains still race like roadrunners. Where does our passion for trains come from? In Winton, the answer may be this one-room schoolhouse next to the BNSF main. The school is closed now, but in its heyday, students had to cross the GN tracks to get to class. How many young boys stopped to watch a freight pounding over the grade crossing and came under railroading's spell? If the action was as compelling then as it is now, we suspect that many of them answered the call to trackside. If Stevens Pass can't get any respect from fans in the summer, it gets even less in the winter. Perhaps that's because most fans are too smart to challenge the snow, the cold, and the wind that characterize the pass between October and May.
Straight back.
But not us. In fact, we fooled ourselves into thinking we could take a four-wheel drive Jeep down a road into the upper Nason Creek Canyon. Say, does anyone know the words to the Steelers' Wheel song, Stuck in the Middle with You?
Stay in the groove.
After we had a chance to play with our truck in the snow, we sobered up. If we couldn't get into the upper Nason Creek Valley, we could at least get to the grade crossing that leads to the Nason Creek Rest Area off Highway 2. Many hardcore fans would scoff at the idea of shooting trains at a grade crossing. They'll sniff that the images you'll come back with are pedestrian, even boring. What do you think? As the snow flew at the Nason Creek Rest Area, we found ourselves thinking about the second crossing of Stevens Pass, the one completed in 1900. Granted, the new route was 9 miles shorter and eliminated the switchbacks, but it did nothing to remedy the dangerous conditions immediately to the west of the first Cascade Tunnel. Here, the tracks sliced across the steep face of Windy Mountain, an area cursed in the winter with avalanches. Snowsheds helped keep the wet, heavy snow off the tracks. They allowed the snow to pass over them and simultaneously support vast weights during the process. By 1910, the Great Northern had spent millions of dollars on snowsheds, including this 3,900-foot reinforced concrete shed at the division point of Wellington. Still, it was only a matter of time before disaster struck the line.
Yeah, the Wellington disaster out of Wellington happened on March 1st of 1910, about 1:30 in the morning. There was two trains parked there. One was the mail train and one was the passenger train. And they had come from Leavenworth, and they were heading for the Puget Sound area, Everett, Seattle, Tacoma. And it was snowing heavy and hard in the Cascades in late February and March. There were slides everywhere. What happened was there was a large avalanche came down and wiped out the two trains, the passenger train, the mail train. It wiped out all the electric trains that were at Wellington, the 4 units, electric units. It wiped out a couple rotors that were stored in the area. It took out the electric shop and several of the facilities that were there, plus killing 96 people. Most of them railroad people and quite a few civilian passengers. These people had been there for a number of days, and they were wanting either to back into the tunnel or possibly get back to Cascade, where they had just come from a few days prior, and they had learned that a slide had come down and wiped out the cookhouse and killed the cook. As far as backing into the tunnel, you have to remember now that was back for heating sources. They used coal burners in the cars, and so they were worried about asphyxiation. After the avalanche, the railroad changed the name from Wellington to Ty, so it could try to erase the memory of the avalanche and the fear that went along with it. In fact, even up as late as the 1980, I was reminded of this fact by my electrical engineer not to tell that story to school kids because it was a bad influence on the railroad.
Berne sits at milepost 1698.5, less than a pimple on the face of North America. Nonetheless, Berne shares its name with the city of the same name in Switzerland, thousands of miles away. Undoubtedly, the comparison has something to do with the Cascades and the Alps. Granted, Berne, Switzerland may have a highway that ducks under a busy railroad in the mountains, but we can think of at least one distinction. It doesn't have the BNSF railroad. The name of the railroad had changed, but the drill at East Scenic remained the same. Park an eastbound in the siding to meet a westbound inside the Cascade Tunnel. It gave us a chance to take a closer look at one of BNSF's 900 class engines. GE calls this a -9 44CW, but it's easier to drop one dash and call them C44s. Some fans are even more casual. They refer to the 4,400 horsepower units as goat boats, based on their Great Northern-inspired paint scheme. The units ride on bolsterless trucks that look like they belong on a Lionel toy train engine. Whatever you want to call them, whatever you feel about the paint scheme, the big GEs have a simple job to do: move trains, which is exactly what you'll see them do at Scenic. Not that the big GEs are alone on Stevens Pass. Bringing up the head end of this eastbound train at Skykomish is SD40-2 number 8007. Trains Magazine christened the six-motor SD40-2 a landmark locomotive, and rightly so. Not counting variations, EMD built 3,957 SD40-2s, each one capable of cranking out 3,000 horsepower from a single 16-cylinder 645 diesel engine. BN's SD40-2s ruled this line from the mid-1970s to the mid-1990s. And even though the torch has passed to the newer C44s, the SD40-2s are far from finished on Stevens Pass. Nor is Skykomish likely to lose its status as a popular place for the Fort Worth dispatcher to meet trains. Case in point, this westbound holding the siding at Sky for a meet with an eastbound. Next to East Scenic, Skykomish may be the most popular place on the line to meet trains, even after dark. The small yard at Skykomish is also a convenient place for BNSF to keep snow fighting equipment. Fortunately, the eastbound train moving in the background tells us that the main line is clear west of town, and that's where we're headed. We don't know if it was clean living or a blessing from Rocky the Goat, but the skies graced us with sunlight on the west slope of the mountain. At one point, we drove to Index to recreate the shot we'd taken in 1994, only to find that the sun was already behind the mountain. Our mood deepened with the shadow over the Skykomish River. Then the scanner crackled with crew chatter. A sign from above. We drove west of Index and found the tracks awash in golden light, and then the trains began to roll. Gradually, the last light faded from the sky, but we didn't care. When Amtrak number 8 rolled around the curve at Monroe, we stood like supplicants at a holy ritual, and the church was BNSF's Stevens Pass.